Hello everybody, Matt Feldman here with the IC Topic Chats. Welcome to our session today. It is Thursday, April 7th, and we're here to talk about fees or pricing considerations. We're actually going to talk mostly about how to calculate your fees, and that's going to be the key thing today. In about 3 or 4 weeks, I think 4 weeks, 3 weeks, we're going to do a panel session on budget negotiations, which I think we'll get into some more of the conversations about how you price and value around it. But today is really going to be about how you identify your hourly or your daily rate. I'm going to go in a little bit broader, but that's going to be the key thing that we're going to get to. This is a core topic or a core session that I like to do every year. If you take the pre-conference workshop, this is a piece of what we do. We always cover. It's never the first thing because we think you shouldn't start with how much should I charge. I think in many ways you're putting the cart before the horse in that situation, but you do need to know these things. If you're paying attention to a lot of other things, it doesn't end with knowing how much to charge in a contract either. You need to be following these things and making sure you understand how this all works. But today we are going to talk about that. To give you a little bit of perspective on this, let me pull in, there we go. A lot of times we feel kind of a little bit like this. I know when I first started off, somebody would say, well, how much are you going to charge when you go out and do this? That's exactly what I felt. After spending some time thinking about this, I felt a little bit more like this. I have no idea. At a certain point, I feel like I just want to tell my clients this. And I know some colleagues, at least when I look at them, I feel like this is the way they operate on a regular basis. But I never feel this way exactly. Some of my colleagues, the ones I feel like I look up to, that's what it looks like to me from their perspective, from my perspective of them anyway. But when we think about this, why do we want to talk about this? We want to talk about pricing because we need to set a pricing method that works for us. And everybody's going to be a little bit different. So I do a lot of educational research projects and program evaluation projects that are funded by government entities. And so I need to set a pricing method that I can not only communicate to my clients, but they can communicate through usually a grant proposal to a National Science Foundation, a U.S. Department of Education, or any other entity. And so there's usually two parties that I'm thinking about when I'm setting my pricing. And when I say I need $10,000 for a project or $10,000 for a piece of a project, I need to be able to tell them why that makes sense. And so that's a value proposition to them. But how does $10,000 break down? Is what they're going to say. Well, what's $10,000? I'll say, well, $10,000 breaks down based upon this many hours and this hourly rate for me. You do need fair compensation for your work, and this is critical, and this is one of the reasons why I love to give this session, and why I think it's really important, because if everybody thought through this process and knew what they were doing, I wouldn't have to spend as much time with my clients explaining why I bill at the rates I do. And I mean, I have just as many conversations trying to tell people why I don't charge as much as what they think I should, which is always a weird conversation to have, because they're like, you're not charging enough, and I have to justify this to more than just you. Or they'll say, I can't understand why you need more than $25 an hour or something ridiculous like that. You know, that's way too low. So we need fair compensation for our work. And so I'm going to help you think through some of the time that you should be committing to different activities. And you need to think through this on your own perspective, but how you think about that. But to do this, you need to identify a rate that makes sense so that you can be sustainable, so you can stay in work, you can maintain your independence, and you can build your reputation. And so knowing what this rate is, particularly for you guys who are early in your careers or early in your independent consulting practices, is going to be critical, because if you can figure this out now, ask any of us who've been around for a while. We wish we knew this stuff 10 years ago, because, well, we would have saved ourselves from a lot of headaches. And I can tell you about some of those headaches, and I'll tell you about one in a little bit. Just know that some pricing strategies are going to vary. I try and stick to a standard rate. And then when we get into questions and answers, I know people will tell me, well, I have a different rate for different people. I question that, but I know that that does happen. I also will build in opportunities to work with people in pro bono, i.e. free work, with the idea of developing work down the road. And it depends on who I'm doing that with. But anyhow, generally, just recently I had, I went into my children's bathroom a week ago, and I looked up and there was mold everywhere, and I went, oh my God. So that was Sunday, last week Sunday, and then I came in the next day and I decided we need to redo a lot of things. So I scrubbed all the mold off, and we decided to change out the light fixtures. Well, I opened it up and I started taking things apart, and then I realized I had no idea what it was doing. And I had all these wires. I'm like, we have 3 fixtures. Why do I have 4 sets of wires? Because, well, I'm not an electrician and I don't know what I'm doing. So I call the electrician, and this is an example of what I talk about. And I don't know where this came from, but he effectively said, he came over and I asked him how much he would cost, and he said $120. And I remember thinking, oh my God, what's $120 worth of your time? You're only here for 20 minutes. Well, at the end of the day, we do the same thing, right? And I justified it in the same way that I do in this situation. This is an old scenario about a carpenter. You call a carpenter in to fix your stairs that squeak. He'll charge you 25 cents for the nail, but he'll charge you $60 for knowing where to place the nail. We do the exact same thing. As experienced evaluators, experienced educational researchers, social scientists, we are experts in our field. We can do things that our clients can't do. That's why we have consulting practices, or we want to have consulting practices, because we have the skill set, we want to develop it. And so we are valuable to them because they can't do this. If they can do it, why aren't they doing it themselves? They're asking for you to do it. Sometimes they need us to do it because it's a requirement in a grant for an external evaluator to have a third-party perspective on whatever's going on. Or a lot of us are brought in because we have a very specialized skill set in understanding how to collect and interpret data in a way that's meaningful to our clients, and I'll put it back for them for their perspective. Anyway, so using this perspective here, we do want to make sure we want to make sure our clients understand we are valuable resources to them, and we do deserve to be paid better than whatever they might pay another contract for another purpose. And when all of you guys charge an appropriate rate, it makes my life easier, and it makes everybody else's life easier, because we as a profession are getting an appropriate amount. What often happens, and you know this, clients decide they need an evaluator, and they go out and they find a grad assistant, or even worse, they find somebody who really can do it, who doesn't have any idea what they should charge, and they charge way too little. And that becomes kind of a price point for them, and we have to fight that conversation on why that is. Now, usually they're underserved. That person is, maybe they're doing a fantastic job, or we have an example of a retired evaluator. He became an evaluator, and he works for like $4,000 a year for this one project, and it's a $20,000 a year project easily. He doesn't care. It's a retirement for him. It is affecting our value. So let's just give a definition. We're talking about payments, usually in cash, sometimes in equity. I think for the most of us, we're going to be talking about cash or check or some sort of transaction that equates to something liquid that compensates you for value you deliver to your client. Your value as program evaluators is that analysis, that work, that interpretation of whatever's happening within a program that you're supporting. Types of fees we're talking about generally are hourly, fixed fees, retainer, value-based billing, and contingency fees. Now, I put across through contingency fees because frequently I don't think it's ethical, particularly if you find yourself in grant writing, to do fees based upon a desired outcome. So in grant writing, there would be, hey, let's say we're writing a project proposal for $200,000, and you'll give me 5% of that value when you get funded. So you'll give me $10,000, 5% of $200,000. You'll pay me $10,000 when you're awarded. I think most of us would agree that sets up all kinds of problems. We're not lawyers, right, that do that based upon suing a company for injuries or something like that. You should get paid for your time. So I put a cross through that. So I would highly suggest you don't think about a contingency fee process. Really today, all we're going to be talking about are the hourly and fixed fee ideas. Retainers are fees where somebody pays you an amount to have access to your time. Hypothetically, you would set your retainer up based upon a certain amount of hours you would do work for a person over a period of time, a month, a year, 6 months, something along those lines. Oh, thanks, Eric. I appreciate your pulling out the GPA ethics. It is something specific to the Grant Professionals Association's ethics with regard to the contingency fee. A value-based billing is a whole other conversation. We have it from time to time within this IC topic chat. It's a matter of really taking what we understand about hourly and fixed fees and moving it to that next level and saying, what is what I'm doing for a client? How much is it valuable to them? And the example I like to give is my father, who was in the oil and gas industry as an accountant. And he would go in and do some accounting magic on oil and gas losses. Don't ask me what that means. And he would save them millions of dollars. And so hypothetically, he never did this. He did an hourly rate, a very high hourly rate. But he could have said, since I saved you millions of dollars, this type of a project is worth $10,000 a day, right? Which is a lot of money, and we'd all like to be able to make that on a regular basis. And I think he probably could have and should have done that. He charged $250 an hour, which I think was a deal and a steal for those folks. We're only talking about hourly and hourly daily rates, also known as per diems or fixed fees. And really a fixed fee, I'm going to suggest, is a fee that we charge for a project that includes time and materials, but we calculate it based upon an estimation of time. So you're either charging hourly, daily, so I'm going to work 20 hours at $100 an hour, and that's going to be $2,000, right? Am I doing that math right? Yeah. So when I work 20 hours, I'll report to you how many hours I worked, but I won't exceed $2,000 for this short project. The fixed fee situation was, I estimated it's going to take me 20 hours to do this work. I'm going to charge you $2,000. I'm not going to show you my accounting on what I actually did, because it might be 16 hours or it might be 30 hours. I'm still just going to charge you $2,000. And from my experience anyway, most clients really want to they really want to pay $2,000 and not worry about following up with you on your hours. That's not the case for everybody, and some of it's because of their internal accounting systems. But almost everybody I know would prefer to say, okay, it's $2,000, fine. That's actually kind of a point that we need to get to, and you need to remember and you keep in the back of your mind with all of this. From most of your clients' perspectives, they want to be at a fixed fee perspective. So we're going to do a calculation on what your hourly rate is today, and you could use that as an hourly basis. But frequently, our clients want to get to that fixed fee situation so you can identify your value. This is a $2,000 project. This is a $20,000 project. Once they agree on that value and they agree with your calculation for getting there, they don't really care. They don't want to know. They just want to know that they're getting a fantastic product that exceeds their expectations. So Bethany Lorson asks, is a retainer basically that the client buys a time bank with you, then they can withdraw from the bank for whatever, whenever? Yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it. Sometimes people will say, you're going to pay me $20,000 for the year, and you'll have access to me on a regular basis. I'll calculate, I'll keep track of my time, and when I go over, I'll let you know. And they may pay you $20,000, and they may never use all that time that you set aside. But you still get to keep the money. That's kind of, I think, the big idea. I've only done a couple of retainers. Feel free, I know there's a couple of folks who are lawyers or have more experience with this. Feel free to post that in the chat while I move on. So I do have some handouts. I'm going to post this, if I can get to it, into the chat. Some handouts that you can pull down for your own. There we go. All right, let me put this in the chat here to everybody. So those the handouts that I'm going to reference are right there. So let's take a look at an example. I'm going to first pull up the setting your fees handout that looks like this. Can somebody give me a thumbs up? I don't see the marks around my screen anymore. Can you see my handout?
Yes.
Yes, great. All right, so yeah, usually there's a little green bar that surrounds my worksheet. So here we go. So this is a handout. It's dated June 11th. I haven't done any updated to it. I want to point out Gail Barrington, who I call the godmother of these independent consulting workshops. She doesn't call herself that. I call her that. She was doing this for 25 years before I got involved with it. So I continue to use her references. I reference her work. She pulled this out of a book, A Guide to the Profession, dated 2002, so it's all there. Anyway, I think this is a good approach. So generally speaking, what we're doing to identify our hourly or our daily rate is we're identifying time. Our time is calculated by, days and weeks of the year, right? We have 52 weeks in a year, 5 days a week, that's 260 days. So what you're generally going to do on part of this calculation is identify your number of vacation days, the days you're not going to work, right? How many days are you going to be gone for vacation? If you're Canadian, you call them public statutory holidays. How many days are going to be holidays? How much time do you need to set aside for sick time? And then you subtract that out. You can see there's examples of this here. And there's an Excel spreadsheet that does this too. I'm going to show that to you, and I'm going to run this thing. It's all available to you guys. Feel free to play with it as much as you want. That gives you how much time is left. And then you pull out time that's not billable time, time to do administration, time to hang out with me on Thursdays for IC Topic Chat, or to travel to New Orleans, or for the AEA conference, or to Atlanta for the Summer Evaluation Institute. Time for professional development. Now this is just time, we're not talking dollars yet. And then you talk about marketing time, that's time to talk to people about writing grants, or calling somebody up and saying, did you know about this one opportunity, or whatever it is, however you do your marketing. Another conversation for another day, but setting aside that time. And that results in your billing time, so your billable time. So you have 52 weeks a year. Take 4 weeks for vacation, 2 weeks I put 2 weeks aside for, actually more than that, because we take time off for Christmas and the Christmas holidays at the end of December. And that is, to me, that's our public statutory holidays, in addition to Memorial Days and Labor Days and 4th of July and all the days that surround those. In my business, we are educational research. We operate like a university research center. We're private, it's my company. But I do provide all the same days off as the local university, just the way they would for a full-time staff employee. And then a week out for sick time. So this is just, you don't have to take this time, right? It's just an expectation of how much time you have to work during the year. And this is one of those times where you want to, give yourself some space just in case, right? This results in time that you'll actually spend working on a full-time basis. Obviously, you need to revise this if you're only going to work part-time. But you have 45 weeks available, or 225 after the calculation. Adding these things up for administration, professional development, and marketing, that results in 33 weeks out of your original 52 that you can calculate for billable time. And that's something that we're going to use in this calculation in a little bit. Know this is there. Anyway, that is the amount of time that you can spend doing client work that you can charge back to people. and that's going to be part of the calculation. That's your denominator. Okay, so set that aside. Remember that. We're going to talk about costs for a little bit. The first 2 pages are startup costs, and these are good reference pages. I'm not going to go into any details here. I'll talk about them real briefly, but know that when you're starting up a consulting practice, these are some things you might want to think about that are going to be one-time costs. Things like registrations, legal fees, if you want to pay for a logo design. By the way, good logo designers are very expensive right now, about $800 for a full package. You can go cheaper through a couple different approaches. If you need to buy a printer, if you need to buy a desk, those are things you may want to think about. This is for your own purposes, for your own considerations. Now, here's your overhead expenses, things that are going to be annual expenses that will go into this calculation of your costs. These are listed here for your consideration. They're going to be things that I probably don't have on this list. These are a lot of things that we kind of see we use often. What kind of expenses? Now, some expenses will be passed through to your clients, so those wouldn't be thrown in here. These are just your expenses. What legal fees do you have? What accounting and finances do you have? Do you pay for an accountant to help do your taxes on a regular basis? Do you regularly check in with an accountant who's supporting your QuickBooks approach? What insurance do you need to have? For a lot of us with employees, we need workers' compensation. But if you don't have an employee, you don't need workers' compensation. You probably should have a general liability and a professional liability. Generally, you do want a general liability. Professional liability, there's other insurances that you may need. We need cyber security insurance now for some of our clients. What marketing costs do you want to put out there? Costs of travel there. Meals and entertainment, I know that sounds silly. What kind of entertainment would you do? Well, are you taking clients out for lunch? Do you want a budget for that? How much does it cost to run your website? These are just expenses for you to think about. And I'm going to put some of these in a calculation in a little bit. Professional development. Are you going to AEA? What's that cost? The Summer Evaluation Institute, I think, was about $500 to attend for 2.5 days. So that, plus you'd have to travel there, plus you have to have a hotel. And you want to reimburse yourself for your per diem or your costs of eating. What equipment do you need? This is the big one. I think of all this that I'm looking at here, I mean, I don't spend that much on pens, but software subscriptions these days, everybody needs to charge you $27 a month for your survey software, for your QuickBooks software, for your Microsoft software. This is a whole topic in and of itself, but how much do you pay yourself to rent your office? Can you rent your office? Is it a write-off if you're an S-Corp, or is it something that you pay yourself monthly, which is what I do for my home office? I'm actually at the downtown office right now. But I have 2 offices. I have the home office, which I pay my wife for because it's a place where I work part of the time, and it's an expense. It's a business expense. Anyway, so we have all these costs, and then we go into this calculation. It's listed here in a worksheet, Microsoft Word format, but I'm going to go into the Excel spreadsheet and we're going to pull this all together, okay? So let me pull that up. It's also at that same location. Let's see here. There it is. I'm assuming everybody can see the Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to, if not, let me know. Should take the ribbon off just to give us a little more. Doesn't want to do. Go away. All right, anyway, it's fine. So here's an original example, the way Gail set it up. So we have our billable days, right? I think that's from this spreadsheet here, or from this worksheet here. So this was the calculation of actual days that you can work. Billable time, 165 days. What is your desired salary? That's a great question. Everybody wants to know that. But I would say if you are starting an independent consulting practice, or even if you're trying to figure out how to do this, what is the salary that you deserve to make? This is not what you think you're actually going to pay yourself, because particularly in the early days, you're probably not going to pay yourself what you're worth. And I would also argue, even if you have the money, you should probably not take a salary at that level for tax purposes. But if you were to go out and get a job doing what you do for somebody, what are your peers making, in the business? What are you worth? And so if I, as a consulting firm owner, went to go work for a university and I started up a research center to do program evaluation, I think I could argue pretty effectively that I'm worth $100,000 a year. That's what my peers who do what I do in other research centers make. And I see you guys are doing a lot of chatting and I can't keep up with the chat. So if there's something that's absolutely pressing, definitely unmute yourself and call me out. Otherwise, I'm going to get to it all after we're done. This is, as I found out, as you grow a business, your overhead grows considerably. But at the early days, an annual overhead cost I think is fair to assume could be $10,000. It might be a little bit more if you're doing a bunch of travel for professional development. That starts to catch up, or if you're doing anything for marketing. But that is taken from this calculation here on the Microsoft Word form about costs. So all of these costs put together, you're going to add them up, and that's going to be your total right here of overhead costs. That's your annual costs. Your total annual cost then is your salary plus your overhead. Now we're assuming you're calculating your employer taxes and everything else in here. This is all the costs. This is a quick and dirty kind of calculation for the purposes of this conversation. Your total annual costs for your business are $110,000 in this. So the calculation is $110,000 divided by your billable days, the number of days you can actually do work. That is how you come up with your base rate. In this situation, that becomes $667. Gail calls it profit, I call it buffer, which is just like, oops, I screwed up, I need a little bit of room here. So I add 10% on top of that just in case. And so that rounds up, that goes up to $733, which rounds to 733. Now I've set this up so you're like, hey Matt, I can work more hours than that. You can change that, and the billing rate goes down. You can charge less, right? And then you divide that by 8. That's $86. I'm worth a lot more. I'm worth $200,000. Well, then you should be charging $165 an hour. That's this calculation. So I'm going to put this back to the original. My real example. I think I did put myself at $125,000. I do have a peer who's making that at the local university. I know my actual annual overhead costs are that. My billable days are much lower right now. I can't do a lot of work because I do a lot of administration. I'm actually overhead for my staff at this point, which is a weird experience. My annual overhead costs are $145,000 for me. I know that's ridiculous. Divided by my billable days, my final daily rate is about $1,600. I charge about $200. I charge $200 an hour. That's how I came up with my calculation for my hourly rate. And that's the big idea. That's the big conversation. I know we're going to get into some more questions and thoughts about this, but I definitely want to give people some space to do that. I'm going to jump back onto the slides for people to see, and let's talk through that. So again, the big idea here is you identify your days you can work on actual work on billable time, identify your costs separately. Part of that identifying your costs, what's your desired compensation? Now desired again, what can you argue is appropriate? Then you basically run the calculations. You put together all your costs and divide by your billable days, and that becomes your daily rate. Divided by 8 is your hourly rate. Okay. All right. So a lot of you guys say this is all fine and great. I do have the opportunity to discuss something that we did as a survey for the Independent Consulting TIG in 2015, and I'm happy to share that with you. There's a lot of, I'm going to actually go into a lot more detail with this in another session, a couple months, I think 2 months from now. We're going to do a session on our detailed fees and costs from the survey. But there was an Independent Consulting TIG survey that was conducted in 2015, and then we reported out. This has all been peer reviewed. We put it into the, New Directions for Evaluation journal in December 2019. So everything I'm going to share with you has been publicly reviewed, but I do like to tell people what I'm telling you is information from your perspective, and I think you should use this to help you gauge an understanding for what's happening in the market. But don't take what I'm going to tell you as gospel for what you should be charging. You need to go through your calculations. You need to understand what I just told you, which is why I told you that before showing you what I'm about to show you, because I don't want everybody to say, hey, Matt's charging $200 an hour. Matt showed how I can calculate $125 an hour. Well, that'll just be my billing rate. I really don't want you to do that. I want you to think about who you are, where you are, your costs. I want you to go through the calculations so that you can justify that to yourself and to your clients if you need to. That being said, here's what people do bill when they reported that back to us on the Independent Consulting TIG survey from 2015. So you can see the reference in the bottom there for the NDE, New Directions journal. The thing to look at here is the median billing rate is $100 an hour. If you did an average, which you shouldn't because there's extremes, it's $125. What is fascinating about this is when we look at the billing rate from 10 years earlier, actually it was 12 years earlier, they did it in 2003, the median billing rate was, that's right, $100 an hour. If you go back to when they did the same survey in the 90s, it was about $85 an hour. What that means is from 2003 to 2015, the median rate stayed exactly the same, which means if you're accounting for CPI or inflation, we actually took a price cut by about, I think, what is it, 16%? I think that was the calculation I have. So we actually reduced our rates. So I use that as a justification to myself anyway, that, hey, we should probably be higher than $100 an hour if that was what the median rate was back in 2003. All right. Just remember that your fees are in direct correlation to your clients' annual budgets. That's a funny way of saying, if you're my dad and you work in the oil and gas industry and everything is millions, if not billions of dollars, you have the opportunity to say, I'm worth a lot more, because frankly, people are getting paid a lot more in that industry, and you can throw that in there. So getting back to the calculation here, the big kind of secret, not so hidden secret, is this calculation here, the 125,000, your desired salary, that's the main determinant of your hours. Of your hourly rate. Your desired salary and your billable days are the main calculations for your hourly rate. Your overhead may be high, mine's higher than it ought to be, but when you own a consulting practice, you've got to buy, you've got to rent space, buy computers, and have health insurance. Things start to go up. But the big deal is, what's your desired salary, what's your billable days? But if you're in an industry where there's a lot of demand for your time and there's a lot of money there, then you can actually, you can justify the higher salary, which increases your rate. All right, a couple ideas. Oh, I see a lot going on here in the chat about insurance. I have to check before we're done today. We will do another session about insurance. Okay, so I did put 5.5 ideas together for this. And I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't looked at this slide since I did it in January, so I don't remember what I wrote. We're about to find out. First thing you should know is know your rate for the purposes of scoping. When you go to talk to your clients, they're going to say, well, how much is it going to cost to do this? You're probably going to say, okay, well, what do you want? You should probably say, well, what do we need to do? You might say, well, we're going to do a logic model development, and I'm going to do a needs assessment, and then I'm going to do annual surveys and focus groups, and then it's going to equate to 200 hours a year or something. And then they'll say, well, what is that going to cost me? And you'll say, well, it's going to cost you however much. Well, how did you come up with that calculation? Now, I'm saying know your rate for the purposes of scoping out your projects because they may never ask you this, but you need to be prepared to answer all of these questions. It's the right and ethical thing to do. If you're doing it based upon a value-based situation, you say, well, it's $20,000 because it's valuable to you and this is what you feel. I mean, you need to be able to have that conversation. To me, I'll say it's $20,000. That's effectively 20 days for my staff because I bill my staff out at $125 an hour, which is $1,000 a day. That's 20 days of work. And it's calculated down like this, where they're going to spend 40% of their time on this and 20% of their time on this and this many hours. And we'll get into that detail when people ask. They frequently don't, but I'm always prepared for that conversation. You need to rethink about your rate on a regular basis. Don't wait 20 years to update your rate. I don't think I need to tell you that. But you should be thinking about if your expenses are changing, are you charging enough to cover your time? You need to consider your value in relation to your client's program. If you're working in the oil and gas industry, I think you can justify your rate being higher, right? Because you're working within an industry where people are getting paid more and there's a greater value that you're providing to your client. Use these resources. They're there. I just provided you with the link. Do what you want with them. They were given to me for free. I developed that Excel spreadsheet in an hour. It wasn't hard. It's there for you to think through. So yeah, absolutely use that. It's okay to reference that NDE article, but don't choose to just use those rates without thinking about it. I gave you the process to do this so that you know it. And finally, on a personal note, last year I gave this presentation on April 14th, and my father died 2 days earlier. And it was really weird because my father was an accountant and I just referenced him. I don't know what it is about these presentations, but my grandmother passed away yesterday. So it's really sad and really weird. She was 94 and she lived a wonderful life. And I don't have a great quote from her. The only one I could think of is, "Shut the door!" But I will say it's just completely strange that that would be the case for that. But anyway, don't worry, I'm emotionally stable. I'm a little bit off and didn't sleep well last night, but we're just fine. And I'm still going to make it to make it today to the ball game. So she would have wanted nothing less, knowing my grandmother, who is a strong farm wife. Sorry, very very gendered at the time, and she ran the accounting and she ran everything with the business, and so at the farm in Iowa. So she wouldn't approve of me being a Cardinals fan, but she didn't have much choice in it. There were Cubs fans in that family. All right, with that, I'm going to stop the share. I'm happy to stop the video now, and we can go into any conversations you have. Any